And I would like to call this meeting to order, and let's have a roll call for attendance.
Director McGorty.
Present.
Director Crane.
Present.
Director White.
Present.
Director Robinson.
Present.
And Director Green is absent.
Okay, so would Juan like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. So next we have consent items, which include approval of the minutes from February 11th and March 11th. Has everyone had a chance to see those?
Yes.
Okay. Whoops.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Okay. Ooh, things are kind of hopping around. It's hard to read this.
Yeah, sorry. I can sit on the minutes or I can sit on the agenda for the consent items. Up to you.
Okay.
I will move to approve the consent items.
Is there a second? Do I hear a second?
Crane seconds.
Okay. I will now call for approval of the consent items. All those in favor signify. Are we going to do roll call or just signify by aye? Roll call. Okay, let's do the call.
Director McGorty.
Yes.
Director Crane.
Aye.
White.
Yes.
Director Robinson. Director Robinson.
Yes.
And Director Green is absent. Motion carries.
All right. Next on the agenda is discussion and possible appointment of tribal stakeholder director. Andrew, do you want to report on this?
I think the next consent item is the UV BGSA FAQ sheet.
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry.
all part of the consent.
That's part of consent, which we agreed to.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, so we've been reaching. I've reached out to all the tribes and Coyote Valley and Geedeville. I keep on thinking Geedeville. Both brought it to their tribal council, but I haven't received approval of the nomination. And I've been in contact with the other tribes in the area, and they want to begin discussions within themselves to continue discussing this item separately from us, so within their tribal network. So this item is still on hold.
Okay, so how long have they been working on this now? Just out of curiosity.
We notified them in November, and we got a nomination in, I believe, February.
Mm-hmm.
And that nomination has stalled, it seems.
Okay. Well, perhaps you and I should talk offline about who to call, who maybe I can gently get them to find us someone, because we'd love to have them represented. We need their voice here at the table. So I'll work with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So next is a presentation and discussion regarding finalized groundwater model results. Okay, so who is going to speak first? Laura?
For this portion of the presentation, I'm going to stop sharing the agenda and just let Amir and Laura present on the next two items for their presentation, because they're all connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amir, can you share the screen? Perfect. Yep, it's all good. So what we wanted to discuss today goes a little bit is what we started last time, and we are trying to put better numbers on our estimate so that you can start doing your thinking and discussion. And I think the two items, we reverse them. So we will talk first about the update on the monitoring network, because that one really comes as a continued discussion from last time. And then Amir will be present the kind of finalized results from the model. We will have a longer session between a working group meeting tomorrow and the TAC meeting on Wednesday. So today is going to be a short, and then if somebody is interested, you can join us one of the other days. There will be more opportunity. So we went through kind of in detail through what we are discussing and suggesting for the monitoring network. What we got as an understanding from last time is that we need to be careful. The monitoring network is a cost for the GSA. So we need to start thinking about what is really critical and important and what can be, let's say, a nice plus. But maybe even if we don't have it right away, it's going to be okay. And the monitoring network needs to be defined for each of the 6, actually 5 for Ukiah sustainability indicators. So we will need to have in the plan, and this is what we are wrapping up, is basically 5 monitoring networks. Let's start with the sustainability indicator of chronic lowering of groundwater levels. As you remember from long ago when we discussed the hydrogeological conceptual model, we highlighted 2 principal aquifers that we call Aquifer 1 and Aquifer 2. And Aquifer 1 is the one, the shallow one, really closer to the river. And then Aquifer 2 is the deeper aquifer pretty much everywhere else. And for sigma regulation, we need a network for both principal aquifers. So we are thinking of basically 4 monitoring wells for Aquifer 1 and 22 monitoring wells for Aquifer 2. Some of these most of these wells already exist. So, and they are already part of the CASGEM program. So it's not gonna be adding any extra cost on top of what is already CASGEM. And then there would be the new wells are the one that DWR is drilling. So those are the cost for drilling is already covered, and together with the instrumentation for those new wells. And I think we are still debating on the final location for the DWR wells, but the agreement is there. So we will have those 5 new wells. And so this is just a quick summary. The map on the right is showing you where the wells are. I have to tell you that mostly for Aquifer 2, we built in some redundancy. So let's say that one of the landowner in one of the CASGEM wells want to get out of the program. We still have enough wells to demonstrate what we need to demonstrate. And next. So for groundwater quality, we were thinking of using as much as possible ongoing groundwater monitoring program. So we know that the city and all the districts, they're already doing their groundwater quality sampling. But the idea was to add some wells that are not part of any current distribution, any current program. So what we decided is to use the 5 wells that DWR is drilling. So where the county already has all the permission for doing everything as extra water quality data. So we are ending up with 5 wells in Aquifer 1, 14 wells in Aquifer 2, and the constituent of concern that we are going to be concentrating on are boron, iron, manganese, and specific conductivity. iron, manganese, nitrate, and specific conductivity are already included in the regular groundwater monitoring program of the city and all the other districts. So we don't need, basically don't need to do anything for those. But boron is generally not included. So we were thinking of adding boron, and just at this point, the GSA would have to pay only for the extra cost of the boron lab test. And so basically, it's going to be 5 wells in which the cost will be for the full suite of 5 constituents. And for the other wells, the GSA cost will be only the boron cost. And next. For depletion of surface water, we will be using mostly the new wells that, if you remember the wells that we are drilling through DWR, they were organized in these nice, hopefully, in these nice transects. And we hope that these wells will be the one really to be used for fully understanding depletion of surface water. But the cost for this is already included in the groundwater elevation monitoring network. So what's left is just the maintenance of, right now we have 2 new stream gauges. We can decide to stop here, or we can decide to install another one. So the GSA will be responsible for maintaining those 2 stream gauges. And next, subsidence, it's the easy one. As you remember, we said that basically there are no subsidence issue in the valley, and the only thing that the GSA will be doing is just checking the satellite-derived INSAR data that DWR will be publishing every year, and use that data into the annual report. So basically, there is no extra cost to the GSA for this. And then next. And then let's sum it all up. And just a second. Okay. So our estimates are for the groundwater elevation. The frequency will be either 2 times per year, like CASGEM so far, or continuous. So there will be a combination of them. And what we think is going to be 16 wells will be done twice per year, and 10 are instrumented continuously. The sampling and the lab analysis cost is basically the cost of going out to just measure for CASGEM, or the cost to go out and double check calibration when it's continuous data. And we were also using the CASGEM budget that you guys have right now. We came up with a $26,000 total per year for maintaining the network. For the water quality, as I told you, we will be using a lot of the existing data. So we just summed up what is left over, which is lab cost for boron plus the 5 wells. And we were just in touch with Caltech, the lab, one of the lab, and they gave us an estimate of about $1,000 per year. Because also we are not thinking of monitoring boron every year, everywhere. We are thinking once every 3 years. And then there will be the need to go out and grab water samples from the 5 water quality wells that we are adding on top of the existing one. And we were budgeting something like 3,000. Probably it's a couple of days of work. So it might even be less, but just to build some redundancy. For depletion of surface water, as I said, the groundwater elevation is already covering for the groundwater data. And for the 2 stream gauges, we were looking at the average cost of $15,000 per year. Storage and land subsidence. Storage it's really mostly covered by the groundwater elevation network. And the only thing that we can add for storage is some more calculation done through the model. So this is going to be covered under another line in the next table, which is more on the modeling cost. Land subsidence, as I said, no extra data. So it's just going to be a question of including the DWR data into the annual reporting. Is it clear, confusing? So we can go back and discuss more, but this is at the end a sort of, we try to work out a sort of preliminary table of expected cost, and I'm giving you brackets because we can do the bare minimum or building a little more. GSA administration, Amber, Amir, and Andrew and we were talking about it. It's going to be something that needs to be evaluated. For the reporting, we are hoping to give you, by the end of our grant, something which is as automatic as possible so that every year things will be easy. But I think we need to count for something like 15 to 25. For the monitoring, all the numbers that I showed in the previous table, they pretty much sum up to 45,000. But as I told you, you can decide to have more. So if you want to have more, I was bracketing something like 45 to 60,000. The model maintenance has a big bracket because it depends. 1 year might be 40, 1 year might be 80, depending on the need of running fixed scenarios or changing something because I don't know, let's say that in 5 years from now, you have so many project and management actions and the management of the basin is completely different. We may need to change something. But with 40,000, we can run the model every year, provide all the data for, the model can run every year, provide the data for all the yearly reporting and a little calibration. So just to check that everything keeps going in the right direction. And the last item that we were thinking of including, and this was one of the suggestions that we got from John Bliss that presented last time, is something to create a fund for grant writing. Because as you see, we are not including any capital projects here. The capital project will be funded through grants, not through the GSA. And hopefully this provides a little bit more details than the first run through from last time. We are giving this number to John for making up his calculation on what might be needed and how to reach the lower and the higher number in these brackets. But this is where we stand. I think it's beside the model maintenance that last time we didn't even mention. We are pretty much in the same order of magnitude.
So Laura, just to sum this up, I just did a quick calculation. You were looking at somewhere between about 115 to 185,000 based on this. And if we threw some level of administration in it, probably closer to 200,000 to finance the program.
So we did a lot of work, Glenn, this month looking at all the submitted GSPs. This is still kind of in the low end side. So it's not, we try to be conservative and be careful on what we are suggesting, but yeah, that's how it looks like.
Laura, what are the annual deliverables, if any, that were responsible after the original submission?
So every year, so DWR actually is putting together now tables. Basically, every year there will be a table. Looks like everything will be online, and you will have to include all the data that you collected for your monitoring network for the year, and then rerun the model for some of the, for example, storage calculation or whatever. It looks like it will be something very standardized. So what we are hoping for is to kind of code it up for you so that it will be easy to include all the numbers and then send it to DWR. But unfortunately, the final format that DWR wants is not yet out there.
So your expectation is that even if we have a year of average or perhaps even above average rainfall, we're still on the hook for rerunning the model to show we're sustainable and then submitting a new set of results every single year forward?
Even if you don't rerun the model, you still have to submit all the data. You can even decide not to rerun the model, and that's okay. In fact, I think our model maintenance is more because you need the model at the 5-year update, and we decided to spread the cost over 5 years instead of saying we don't need anything for 4 years, but then on year 5 we need 200,000, for example. So that's how we were thinking about it. But you still, even if you are all good, even if there is tons of rain, you still have to submit the data.
Sorry, Laura, I just want to jump in to say
Sure.
The model, so there are some parts of the water budget that needs to be submitted every year. So that part should be calculated now. It depends on if you want to calculate it through the model or do you want to do it analytically. So that's part of the annual reports that should be submitted. The other thing is each year the sustainable management criteria that we set should be checked. So if any of those relates to the model, then it needs to be run so we can check that even if it's like a high rainfall and everybody knows we're good, you have to show it. So then it should be run so we can submit it to the DWR. The other thing is a 5-year report that we don't have it in this cost. So each milestone you have to submit like a evaluation practically for each milestone. That's a larger report that we don't really know the extent of what needs to be submitted in that report. But hopefully if everything's going in the right direction, that shouldn't be a huge deal. But if things need to be significantly changed, then that's going to be a whole lot of model work and reporting. But that hits in the 5-year.
Yeah, we don't expect to see these. I think these costs might be very different year by year, but it's much easier to have a budget that eventually builds up for whatever emergency funds or and a lot of these things, Zach, actually can be then built into the implementation grant. So we'll be writing an implementation grant, and if you guys you are in a good position for getting those grants, and if that happens, a lot of these costs will just end up into the implementation grant, so the GSA will not have to pay. At the same time, we invested so much in this model, and finally you will be seeing something more also today, that might be good to keep the model up to date and running, so that then, if you remember, we built the model in the way we did it because we want to be able to coordinate with what USGS is doing for Sonoma water, and so have a coherent approach. So maybe down the road in 5-10 years from now, you will want to still be able to run your own scenarios with the model and be able to double check what's happening. So I think it's a big plus that you want to keep in mind. But again, I think these costs kind of take into account what Amir was saying for the 5-year update, kind of building up funds every year. Does it make sense, Zach?
I'm following you so far.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
This is small potatoes, the water quality, degradation of water quality. But when I look at the components of that, with the exception of the nitrate level, these other things are entirely beyond our ability to influence, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are we supposed to do? Like say boron, that varies depending on where you happen to have your hole in the ground. I mean, why are we checking things that we have no control over? And are they going to somehow, if those numbers change, are we supposed to do something about it? I mean, because that's some hidden cost that's going to pop up later.
That's a great question. No, you are not supposed to do much more than monitoring. The idea of monitoring for those constituents is because they are generally high in the basin, and you want just to be able to demonstrate that none of the projects that or management actions that the GSA will implement will have an impact on those let's call them pre-existing conditions, because they are already there. So it's just a question of monitoring. And then if something goes over the top in terms of, because something happens, it's more a call for the regional board, and they will be the one intervening. So the GS doesn't have much authority in terms of water quality. It just has the duty to monitor.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, along the same line of thinking here, could we use a different label other than constituent of concern for boron, iron, manganese, and specific conductivity? It's a legally defined term under Sigma. And I agree with Al. I'd hate to find ourselves in a jam because the well 20 feet outside my window, I know is a high manganese well, and we just added it to our CASGEM monitoring program, and we're now calling it a constituent of concern. Are we going to box ourselves in here?
We can think about something. I mean, I think we can think about another type of. I hope so. We wrote up now the description of our suggested approach for water quality, and hopefully, when you read the text, I think we will be ready to send it out in the next week or so for you guys to start reviewing more critical pieces of this. I think in a couple of weeks, we still need to send it to Andrew. We were too busy with all these estimates and models. But yeah, we can debate about how to call it, Zach. I'm not even sure if constituent of concern is really a Sigma term. Probably not. That's a good point. We can look at it. We can think about how we want to define it. But the idea is really not that you need to, let's say, clean up for boron or manganese. That's naturally occurring there. But the idea is just, let's imagine that, Zach, on top of the well where you know that there is high manganese, you decide to put, I don't know, you decide to do infiltration at high capacity, and maybe something happened, you spread all the manganese around or stuff like that. That's the main goal. Just demonstrate that things are not going worse because of our action with the Sigma plan.
We look forward to reading your language, especially when it includes words like naturally occurring.
Why?
Yes.
You don't like it?
No, I'm saying I wanted to say those things, naturally occurring.
It's naturally occurring, so it's not that you need to clean it up.
Good.
Yeah. So, but we will appreciate when you will have the chapter 3 for review, really going into this detail. I think there is a lot of room for changing words and definition as long as we follow what's required. So we can debate. And I think reading it maybe will help.
So everybody needs to understand that the water quality from our aquifer is better than a lot of bottled water in California. So our total dissolved solids are quite low. Most of the boron, iron, manganese, nitrate are very, very low, and we have extremely clean water. And I guess the point is we want to keep it that way as well. So that's part of the reason why they monitor for these things. But we overall, compared to groundwater in places like Monterey County, we're in really good shape. We're not overdrafting, and what is here is not really a human health concern as far as any of the mineral content. And Laura, do they also check for biological issues, or are bacteria or coliform looked at?
So in principle, those are not of high concern in groundwater. That's usually more for surface water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a lot of question up in Siskiyou County about including bacteria, but there are no standards. It's very, at the end, it's expensive, and I decided to kind of suggest that so far is not the duty of the GSA. But then if some of you thinks very strongly that bacteria should be included, we can bring them in.
No, it by definition, if you do a well properly and it's sealed to the surface and properly cased, the water is usually sterile and you shouldn't have any issues. And about the only time that we really see problems are shallow wells that aren't properly sealed and have livestock or animals around them. So normally we can assume groundwater is pretty clean and doesn't require a lot of treatment, even though it gets it anyway, just to be sure.
Yeah, that was kind of my reasoning, because there were a lot of questions about that, but it's really tough even to set the thresholds, and if you don't have existing data, it's not really, I think it's not needed so far. I think these 5 will satisfy the requirements because, as you said, Glenn, groundwater quality in general is pretty good. I think the good thing is also that at the end of the day, we can satisfy the requirement, but because there is already an existing network of groundwater quality sampling, we are really budgeting for a very small amount as GSA contribution. So I think it is a pretty efficient way to have a good distribution and a good picture of the condition all over. More question, or we let you chew on these numbers and you can get back to us and tell us if it's nonsense or not. I think now they are kind of close to be final. We can still debate a little bit here and there, but
Laura, is it correct then that we would make a choice on whether or not we want a slow, steady burn with the numbers and doing work every year, or if we want to have a scenario where we go to a hibernation mode and submit monitoring results, but perform no other activities for a duration up to 5 years, and then we have a big expense on that 5th year for the updated report? Is that a choice that we have?
as long as you submit your annual reports with the data, then everything else is up to you. Still, I think we will get to the discussion about project and management actions that might be in place for starting reacting to lowering groundwater levels or stream depletion. And there will be something that probably needs to be demonstrated every year. So what I've been told when I called one of my colleagues at DWR is that probably what they will be using to evaluate the plan and checking that something is happening. Doesn't need to be a huge project, but show that something is happening. So even if it's a preliminary study or evaluation of possible conservation measures or whatever. I know that in your valley you have probably that anyway. Something needs to happen. So it doesn't need to be necessarily the big project and the big modeling update, but we will have something that steadily goes on. Because if you wait, let's say that we set some minimum threshold and we do nothing for 5 years. And in 5 years, we are below those thresholds and we have nothing in place to really bring things back up for some reason. Then we might be in trouble. So it's good to eventually have a plan that even with small action starts on year 1. And that's what DWR will be evaluating. So they said clearly that they didn't approve some of the alternative GSPs because those alternative GSPs were based on previous groundwater management plan that they were sitting on a shelf for 20 years. And they don't want to see the plan sitting somewhere. So, but it might be a minimum effort, Zach, for 5 years, see how things go, and then just be ready to ramp up. I still think that this basin has so many opportunities to get implementation grants that probably writing an implementation grants is the first thing I would do. And if you get one of those, then you can keep working, and some DWR is still paying for that. Okay. And we will get back to this anyway, I think. Any more questions on the cost or how it will work? Then it's gonna be a board decision, Zach. For example, if you want to have 1 year with a very small budget and 1 year with a bigger budget. For us, it was easier to spread it around over the 5 years, but it's not our decision. We can just give you numbers, and then how to make it happen, that's another story.
I have one more question.
Sure.
You just made the point that grant writing might be a good place to put your effort, because you can get actions funded and without having to come directly from your pocket. That's a nebulous term to me. Is there I'm sure that $15,000 of grant writing could pay off big or pay off little, depending on who you give it to. So do you have any ideas or suggestions on how to maximize the return on something like that? Is there like an outfit that does this sort of thing and has better returns than others or whatever? I don't really understand the process.
So Al, I'll use an example of the Resource Conservation District, because we subscribe to them, so to speak. We give them a relatively paltry amount of money, which is about, I think, $50,000 a year from Mendocino County government. And they write grants. And this last year, they wrote almost $2 million worth of grants. So we already have a relationship with the RCD. That's an example of somebody who we could work with to be kind of our contractor and partner in some of the grants that we would write. And obviously it's worth it for them, because that's how they pay for their staff. So I'm not too worried about that part. And that's who they would be my go-to people if we have to do this, since we're already working with them and they're already doing our CAS gem monitoring. I also wanted to report out to you that I did a little bit of research and trying to figure out how does the county fund the water agency. Just so you know, we have our own budget unit number. We are a special district. We bring in right now about $166,000 worth of revenues from different sources, including property tax. There's money that was assessed for our participation, I guess, in the study of Lake Mendocino, and we continue to draw funds from that. The Mendocino County Water Agency Board is the Board of Supervisors. It has, as an organization, resided inside of the executive office, but I understand now that it's in Department of Transportation. And Amber, you would be probably our financial person. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I do the budget now. This was the first year I put together the proposed budget for the water agency.
So the other thing that's interesting, and looking at the big budget book, I noted that there's about $80,000 charged to that in staffing, and I don't know who that goes to. So what I kind of approached Darcy Antle, who is one of our deputy CEOs in charge of finance, and she's not familiar enough with it. So I gave a quick call to Sarah Ducat, who kind of helped me track where the budget unit is and what's in it. So the point is that there already is some basis of income for us to be able to afford these things. So the question is how we designate it and use the money. And that becomes a decision in part of the CEO's office, but also the Board of Supervisors. So this is something we'll have to have a discussion on. Amber, anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, the water agency budget with the current expenses, actually the Board of Supervisors gives us about an extra $40,000 every year on top of that 160 you're talking about. So just the water agency operating budget is around $200,000, which does not include any funds for this GSP. So anything that the county put towards the GSP would need to be an additional general fund allocation, because that we essentially, with an additional $40,000, break even every year on the water agency.
Mm-hmm. And I believe $40,000 might be what we're contributing for legal fees for the Potter Valley project.
That was actually separate. That $50,000 was on top of the $200,000. So that was a budget adjustment at second quarter, I believe, that came from general fund.
But just to let everybody know that there already is some structure within county government to finance our program. It's just at the moment we're not really directed on that. So it's something for us to address in the future. Okay, so I guess
Good.
next we can move on to the update on integrated model.
Amir, is all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna just go over the integrated model. I know we have the finalized result, but since the TAC meeting this time is after the board meeting, so we're gonna go to the TAC with the water budget and the results, and then come to you next month with the water budget. But we had a working group meeting tomorrow, as Laura mentioned, and we're gonna have the TAC meeting next week. So if anybody's interested in seeing those results in addition to these, please join us in those meetings. So we have shown you updates on the integrated model before. It's been a process. It's going to be a process. Like, this is not the final. We're going to improve it as we go if we see points of improvement. But I'm going to show you our final calibration that we're actually using to run water budgets now. So the data that we use for the model comes in basically two forms. One is groundwater elevations that we grab from the CASGEM database, and the other one comes from the USGS gauges that are stream flows. And we're trying to make the model simulate these values the best that it can. So I start from what seemed to be the most important to us, the Hopland gauge, which is basically whatever flow goes out of the basin. And in the similar slides that I'm going to show you, the picture on the left is basically average monthly flow. The picture on the right is daily flow. So it's the same gauge, but it's the different temporal scale. The red would be our simulated, what model puts out as a result, and the blue would be what's measured in that gauge and be used for the calibration. So our calibration period was 2014 to 2018, and the reason for that was the CASGEM program started 2014, so we didn't have much data to go by. And as you can see, we got a pretty good result in terms of flow from the model at Hopland. Our general RMSE for the model, the root mean square error, which is a measure we use to calibrate for the three gauges, were about 150 cubic meters per day, which is small when you consider the amount of flows that goes out of the basin. The second gauge that I'm going to show you is Talmadge, is right by the treatment plant. And this one also shows a good fit, a really good fit in terms of monthly flows. It captures most of the flows on a daily scale. And if you see there are misses on the low side of the flows, those misses are not really huge. Like if you see that goes dry, but the model doesn't go entirely to zero, but basically it's like 2 cubic feet, which is pretty small in terms of the flow. And the third gauge that we use is basically natural flow that comes in from the north of the basin and is measured before east fork flow from the lake comes in. So it's the West Fork gauge. And this one also shows a pretty good coordination with the measured values. Again, the flows are pretty small. The monthly plots that I'm showing you are on log scale. So if you see -2, 0, and 2, those are log scale. So basically anything below zero is a very small amount of error. So we are simulating general Russian River flows pretty well in the model. Now I'm going to go to the tributaries. So as you know, we don't have much data on tributaries to use. So Al and Zach were kind enough to give us some observational data in terms of when some of the tributaries went dry or wet during 2018. Use that as discrete point to just try to make the model go dry in those days. And also we have gauges that were shared by the CLSI with us by Laurel that we put in the model, but the amount of data that we have through that program is very limited. It's normally between a year or two of continuous measurement from privately owned wells and stream gauges. So the gauges that you see are 5 gauges, 6 gauges actually. 2 of them are on MacNav on the same stream, and 2 are on the same stream in our model, which we could just use one of them because they were defined on the same segment. So as you can see, but what we really cared in simulating tributaries was to capture at least the low part of the flow. So we know when they go dry, the model actually goes dry. And we have a pretty good coordination, although it was very difficult to get the model to get to simulate these tributaries. So the red is the simulation, which is a continuous, as you can see, and the blue is the data that we have from those programs. Now, in some of them, you see the blue is a bit above 0, and the model goes to 0. And that's, I think, the error in the gauge. We're assuming those are 0. And the problem with this data that we calibrated to was they are privately owned, so there is no extensive flow measurement done. So the rating curves that we used were kind of estimated. So there was a lot of uncertainty about the flow that we calculated. Now to the groundwater elevation, which is the other huge part of the model that we want to simulate. I'm picking just 5 wells, so we have all the calcium wells in. With this calibration, the root mean square error is about 8 meters for all the wells that we have. So we have a bit of error in groundwater elevations, but since we don't have any continuous measurement data in the basin, and the amount of data that we have are very, very scarce, and we have a bit of uncertainty in terms of geological nature of the Redwood Valley, we think it is pretty much acceptable in terms of elevations, and we do get a good coordination between the wells. Now, I picked these 4 wells to show you the different scales of errors that we can see. But to the left and the bottom, that's the DWR wells, which have a very long record. And if you can see, we are capturing the average head in the well pretty well. But we are having, and the black is the simulated, I forgot to mention. So the red is observed. So in the black line, we see a more frequent seasonality than it should be. So we are over predicting the seasonality in that well, but we're capturing the average. In the well on the top to the left, which is Ukiah Valley 8, we are pretty much in the same order, but we're kind of over predicting the heads. The reverse case is on the right, which is we are kind of always underestimating the well, but pretty good fit. And then a kind of a same situation, Ukiah Valley 26 on the right low, which we are getting the average, but we have too much seasonality showing up. Again, the errors are not that huge, and it depends on the application that we have, but we think we have a pretty good coordination between the simulated and observed heads with some errors that we're trying to improve, but we probably need more data to go better than this stage that we are now.
Amir, maybe can I add something? Can you go back to the slide? So what we are finding, it's true that we show more seasonality, but what we are finding out in other basins where finally we have a year or 2 of continuous data is that the CASGEM measurements that happen in March is usually not the high, and usually the high is maybe April. So it's already kind of an average measurement, and also the CASGEM measurements in October is not really the low. So what we are finding out in other basin is that the CASGEM well with the 2 measurements per year are not really able to match the entire seasonality. So probably I would say that once we start looking at our continuous data, my gut feeling is that the reality will be somewhere in the middle between the CASGEM data that are there now and our model, because there is more seasonality than what is captured just by the 2 measurements per year. And that's why this is something that we will be able to explain in the GSP and justify why we think it is important to have at least a few continuous data so that we can fully understand how the system is reacting.
I think Mr. Crane has a question.
Okay.
A couple of questions, if I may. I think it's important for us to understand what the cost difference is for continuous versus periodic. If it's the same equipment in the same spot, it might not be very much difference. And certainly continuous is more useful information. And then I would appreciate an explanation, help me understand how to interpret or understand the charts for water elevation. You spoke to the idea of relative elevations between those items. I'm also looking for some sort of a base. My background is construction, and we think in terms of, you know, a pin in something that is the base elevation, the point of reference or reference elevation. How do we interpret these groundwater elevations in relation to each other and anything else?
Sure. Laura, do you want to go ahead, or do you want me to?
I can go to the cost from our estimates, Doug, and that's why we included basically a good almost half and half of continuous data versus 2 times per year sampling. The systems that we are installing are pretty solid, and I don't think they are not expected to break easily. They are on a solar panel battery, so there is no need to change the battery. So I think the twice per year sampling and the continuous data will have a very, very comparable cost. And that's why in the table before, I think we were suggesting 16 wells monitored twice per year and 10 continuous monitoring. It is something that we can change down the road once you guys feel more confident also about the data that we are collecting and that the instruments are collecting, but the cost is not much different.
Well, if there's a cost in the difference of the equipment, we should understand that.
There is a cost. Yeah, there is a cost in the equipment, which is for what we are installing right now. It's all covered by the grant. So what we are installing right now, it's not. It's there, and the pressure transducers that we install is usually in the order of $800, and then there is a cost for the telemetry system for sending the data every day or whenever you want it, and that's about $1,500. So those stations have a hardware cost of about $2,000, and that's it. And then some of them may work for 2-3 years without maintenance.
And if they're used to get data, say once a month or all the time, probably doesn't change the cost of the equipment or the connections.
Yeah, it's all the same. Usually we set them up to grab data every either 15 minutes or every 60 minutes. So every hour or every 15 minutes. And it doesn't make a big difference because we're not talking about huge files anyway. And then the way they are set up, every night they send a message via cell phone to our computer, and everything gets automatically saved.
And as the technology changes, there may be more economical communication systems available for the data.
Yeah. So far, I think using the cell network, we bargained a pretty good cost with AT&T. I think we pay $5 per month, something like that, for sending this message every night.
In this day, that's fairly reasonable.
Yeah.
And then on to the question about the relative elevation.
Yeah. So I think probably, Amir, what we can do, we should do it before the meeting tomorrow, is add the reference of the top elevation to the graphics so that we understand how far down these wells are.
Yeah, so what I showed here, because it's kind of the matching of these two graphs were the point that we were trying to make. But I don't know if you can see it because it's pretty small, but what is on the left axis of these plots is the elevation above sea level. We can just put the same
Which
chart.
page are you on?
The same page that I'm showing.
It's 14.
Oh yes, 14, right. So the 14 with the 4 charts of the groundwater elevations, we can do feet below ground, below surface ground, which would be a more sensible measure that everybody senses. What we look for in these charts, other than the absolute value of this elevation, is to look to see. For this, we wanted to see the match, but basically you want to see the trend. And also the seasonality, how much it changes between spring and fall, between low and high, and also if you can see a downward trend in general on the average, if the groundwater is showing a trend or is constant. So these 4 wells that you can see, none of them show actual any trend. So it shows that the groundwater elevation are generally stable in the basin, which is good news. You don't want it to go downward. So that's basically how to look at these plots. But when we want to show the levels, a better way of showing it is, instead of putting the absolute value of above mean sea level, would be feet below ground, which means the distance from the surface to the water level.
I think both of those are important, because knowing how well they're connected, how they behave, react to what happens at one location compared to another is informative as well.
Yes, they're the same. It's just another measure. Like it's the same chart. It's just the elevation shows you the direction of flow basically when you track it, because it shows the gradient. The feet below surface basically shows you you can actually track it. It's a better way. Like if you own a well, it's a more sensible thing to track, because it shows you how deep you should go to see water. So if that goes down, so if it was 40 and now it's 45, it shows you have 5 feet of decline, which is not a good news. But when it goes to elevation, it's not that, you can't really feel the elevation because it changes with the elevation of the land also.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's a good suggestion, Doug. We will add both so that everybody can look at the one that it's more convenient.
Yes.
Any other questions, or are we ready to move on? Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, Andrew, so you can put up the agenda again.
Right, sound good. I believe that was our last item.
Okay, so are we on to director reports now?
Correct.
All right. So any director reports?
Glenn, I have an observation and perhaps a question related to current events.
Okay.
It's my understanding that there's the potential for a major cannabis expansion within the basin. There's a coming vote that I believe you will be part of within a week or two. And I also understand that the way the rules are set up with water use for future cannabis, that groundwater would be the primary source of irrigation water for any future cannabis grows inside the basin. Largely because regulated water such as the Russian River or RFC are not allowed explicitly or implicitly. Please, anyone correct me if I'm incorrect on these things.
I don't think that's true. I think that they can use flood control water, as far as I know.
Oh, it's just state regulated water that's off the table?
As far as I know, that's correct.
Okay. So a question for Laura and Amir would be, do we have any scenarios that we're modeling right now or future scenarios that would perhaps give us some hints what a substantial increase in water demand on the aquifer would look like?
That's what we have to design all together. So we will need an estimate from probably the county, or I don't know, of how much water is used right now. You know, our model right now is stopping in 2018 for what the calibration that Amir just showed, but then will be used as you know, for running scenarios. It's gonna be a decision of the group of telling us, we really want you guys to run the expansion of cannabis scenarios or whatever, and we will need information about are they using diverted water or are they pumping groundwater, and a rough estimate. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we need an estimate of how much water we are talking about. So we are going exactly through the same process in Siskiyou County. We are finding out that we put out our first cannabis scenarios, and basically they were laughing at us because it's so much more. We were estimating using aerial photographs, but no, it was not correct. So I think, Zach, that's something that it would be useful if we can get some direction on from you guys living in the valley on really which type of water are we talking about? Is surface water diverted? Is groundwater? How much and roughly where?
So I'd like to share with this group a little bit about what I know about cannabis water use and what are the implications of phase 3, which would expand acreage. So first of all, really good data on cannabis water usage is hard to come by. The estimates I've seen is that somewhere between probably 1.3 to 2.2 acre feet of water would be used for cannabis, depending on the size of the canopy and how it's grown. And you know, the more surface area of foliage you have, the more water you use. So what I kind of envision, if we expand the industry, it'd be probably treated like a row crop and kind of grown in a pastoral way. I'm not talking about, you know, poorly constructed hoop houses and garbagey looking grows. I don't want that. There are a number of growers in our wine, grape, and pear industry that would like to grow cannabis under phase 3. And what I would envision would be more of a row crop kind of setting. I anticipate that you should probably, for consumptive use, allow about 2 acre feet, which would be pretty similar to the pear industry. The other big issue that we have to talk about is that everyone gets upset when they hear 10% of the acreage could be planted to cannabis. But so we have 26,000 irrigated acres in Mendocino County. And if we were to plant 10%, that would be 2,600 acres. That would be about the same footprint as the wine grape industry in Anderson Valley. But I want you to consider that the best estimates that I can find, and they are estimates, I don't have any solid data, is that 5,000 acres of cannabis would supply all of the state of California in cannabis in terms of its present legal use through dispensaries. So if that were the case, Mendocino County, if it was fully planted out, would be able to supply about 60% of California with all the cannabis that it uses, which I think is a very unlikely scenario because there's other counties that are way ahead of us in terms of large plantings. This year in Santa Barbara County, there will be several grows that are approaching 100 acres. And their biggest problem is finding capacity to process it. And they're actually bringing some of that to Mendocino County to be processed by the people who are processing cannabis on a large scale here. So while everybody fears, the expansion of the cannabis industry, I get it. I would fear it if it was all going to be based on poorly constructed greenhouses with garbage around them, with road base put down so they could grow in plastic bags full of organic soil. And there's in no way support anything like that. In fact, probably the most important thing we need to do now is get after all the illegal grows that are going on. And, as a supervisor, I am going to support a active code enforcement program like Humboldt County, where we start getting rid of those things, because they've been proliferating at just an alarming rate all over the county, but especially in my district in Redwood Valley and Potter Valley. And these things are clearly illegal. I mean, there's no licenses on them. If they've been added in the last year, they're definitely illegal. And, we need to get what we have under control before anything is expanded. And that's in fact how it would work, because phase 3 will be secret compliant. So it meets all the state regulations, and they can't plant before 2023. So we've got some time to work out some of the issues, but I want people to know that I do not want an expansion of the existing cannabis industry as we know it. The idea of growing things with water trucks and generators and poorly constructed greenhouses, using labor that is paid cash. I'm trying to guide the cannabis industry to be like a real industry that adds value to our community. And if we're going to have cannabis, it needs to be done right. I'm sorry I'm getting on a soapbox here, but because we are talking about water and we are talking about the future and we are talking about crop expansion, I think it's important that we understand my perspective of what I'm willing to live with as someone who's going to be involved in making regulatory decisions.
Yeah, that's actually, Glenn, is something useful to hear, because one of the biggest issues we have somewhere else is that we've also been asked to run scenarios that are looking into all the illegal cannabis. Mm-hmm. And illegal cannabis is through water trucks. And this summer, because of some of these water trucks, there were a lot of wells, domestic wells, that went dry just because the neighbor wells were selling water for illegal. So the illegal components add a lot of complexity. And so I think in this specific case, it looks like we can at least get the scenarios that look at the legal cannabis expansion and see where we go from there.
Yeah. Beth, you have your hand up, and you can answer that question about whether it's legal to use water from the Russian River flood control for growing cannabis. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. I heard that, so I wanted to jump on and just say yes. The legal position of the flood control district's license is that we cannot discriminate against a particular use, but the liability is on the customer to follow all the laws and regulations regarding their use. So whether that's grapes, pears, cannabis, or corn, it doesn't really matter. And so, yeah, we have a pretty clear idea, a clear understanding at flood control about the regulations and reporting on that. I did want to say that thank you to the Farm Bureau. They held a committee meeting the other day and invited me to that, where Supervisors Haschek and Williams, who are the ad hoc committee for the county on the cannabis, I don't know the official title, but the topic was cannabis. There was a very interesting conversation, a lot about this legal versus illegal and enforcement, and water became a hot topic in that discussion. And so I offered the cooperation of water suppliers to work with the ad hoc committee in order to explore, where water is coming from, they need to have a bigger picture. So Supervisor Williams immediately jumped on that offer and accepted it. I imagine as soon as our drought emergency is a little bit behind us, then I'll be able to help provide some time to that. And I'm thinking maybe Mr. Robinson might be a good addition to that conversation.
Sounds like someone just volunteered.
Yeah, so we are looking at kind of expanding that understanding to what we're talking about here as well. So I'm hoping all of these discussions will inform each other nicely, and I'll be happy to report back to the TAC on that.
And I just want to make the comment that I feel like, we've all heard of COVID fatigue. I think in Mendocino County, we're having cannabis fatigue. We're so tired of talking about this. We're so tired of the goodwill of our community being taken advantage of by people who have no intention of following any of the rules, that we've reached a breaking point where we have to go to active code enforcement. I don't think that we can sit by and watch this thing expand, because people I know who are directly affected by it are just furious. And I really feel like in the leadership role that I have to do something. And that seems to be our best option. So we're going to have a discussion on both water and cannabis on April 12th, a special Board of Supervisor meeting. I would encourage all of you to tune in to hear about our water situation, because it's really not good. And we'll have a kind of a countywide discussion of where we stand. And this is definitely not the year to expand anything as far as agricultural industry goes. In fact, we're going to have to figure out how to grow our crop with virtually no water by the end of this summer. So it's going to be a very, very difficult year for water as far as those of us depending on surface water supplies. Interestingly enough, the Ukiah Valley Basin, thanks to Sean White and kind of his very proactive activities that he's done for the system since the last drought, is in quite good condition. They have several new wells. They've refurbished some of the others. They have the recycled water project, which is going to recycle about 700 acre feet. They have groundwater replenishment that they're doing. So the city of Ukiah sits on top of the equivalent of 2 Lake Mendocinos, and I believe that they are in quite good condition. And I also think that it's time for us to get over all of our balkanization and think about having a connected system that goes from Ukiah to Redwood Valley, that in years like this, the city of Ukiah can wholesale them water so that they have a reliable, safe water system. It's really kind of time that Mendocino County woke up and stood up and started looking at using the powers of our local government to be able to provide water safely for the entire county, for all of our little cities and towns. Doug.
Over the past 15, 16 years, we've worked on doing just that. The city recently requested a seat at the table with the larger group of water purveyors, and the Sand District is resisting the city's presence there. But we've advocated for and have provided in the past water through the city system, through Calpella water system to Redwood Valley, and are prepared to do that again. We've made multiple suggestions about ways that the city's resource could be applied to the greater community, and we look forward to that discussion in depth for the greater good of the community. But we need a place at that table, or we certainly seek a place at that table.
Well, thank you for that, Doug. And I again, as we start looking at climate change and we think about what are the most noticeable effects, obviously water is the critical one. And our old model, which we actually sort of used here, even in Mendocino County, of having mountains that captured snow, which melted and got caught in reservoirs and then were distributed, it's just not going to be as effective as it used to be. And groundwater increasingly is going to be where we store water during periods of high flow. And, this is so important what we're doing here. because in the long term, this is going to become an extraordinary resource for us in the Ukiah Valley. And we're fortunate to have it. And it's great that we're planning now on how to care for it and measure it and be sure we're not abusing it. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Sure.
Under these director reports. I know the flood control district met on Monday and advanced to a stage 3 water supply warning, saying that there will likely not be water sufficient quantities to meet all demands. We got 2 other stages, crisis and an emergency. And I don't know that there's a whole lot of difference. I think those are going to roll through. There was a meeting yesterday, from what I understand, an emergency meeting called by the State Water Resources Control Board, where information related to the when the water is going to be cut off coming from the Old River and when they could expect that there would not be water available in the rivers. And I've gotten that information secondhand, but I believe Beth was at that meeting, so I would like her to report on those 2 topics so we get the facts straight.
Thank you, Al. I'll just say I'm doing this without any notice, which I'm happy to do because I have a couple of folks, both Glenn McGordy and Devin Jones, who were also in that meeting yesterday, so they can help keep me straight and honest on this. So yes, it looks as though there is significantly far less water in the system and available this year than we thought even as much as a couple of weeks ago. And we are now going to be meeting, we being regional water suppliers and interested parties such as the Farm Bureau, all up and down the watershed. We'll be meeting weekly with the State Water Resources Control Board. The idea is to develop a drought agreement, which would be a locally designed plan for conservation, essentially. But at this point, we're looking at how much water is left and meeting the needs of the public health and safety as a priority for that. So I believe that many people will be receiving notification from their water suppliers of mandatory conservation, probably along the lines minimally of 25%, possibly more. And those will probably be coming in the next few weeks. It's much more dire than we had expected, and the situation is being updated daily, hourly even. And as always, I have my emails on Friday that go out. If you're not getting them, please contact me. I'll put you on the list. The district now has a Facebook page as well to help with transparency. We're working with the Resource Conservation District to help on the public outreach. I'll let Glenn and Devin have a swipe at this while I review my notes a little bit too.
Devin, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Sorry, Glenn, I'm multitasking here.
I'm sure.
So yeah, I actually am going to be working. I missed the last couple minutes of that, but because I had to take a phone call. So I will, I'm working with the state board to get some more clarity on some of the requirements related to cannabis and water use. So, and going into this season amongst everything else. So if I find out any information, I'm happy to share.
Okay. And my only observations is that it's important, evidently, not to Doug, do you have a comment or question?
This fits in with the point you raised about the amount of water that is, we understand, below us in this basin. As I understand the regulation that this body is in existence because of, the regulation establishes a depth to which the water can be drawn that does not allow us to get any, it doesn't allow us, a more significant portion of that volume that, in my opinion, should be available to us, because since we haven't historically drawn down the basin, the level that has been set for this basin, if I have my information correct, is much higher than if we had been drawing the water. And the purpose of this body, of this function, is so we don't draw seawater, so we don't have subsidence, etc. But we're sort of an outlier in terms of our geology. And I think if we're not careful, we could wind up by regulation not being able to use the water below us. And I raised this point a couple of times in the past couple of years. And I think it's important that we understand what we can and cannot do and try and change those things that we can to make more of that water available within the intent of the regulation.
That's a really good point. And Laura, do you want to weigh in on that? So as we look at this pretty well managed basin, what happens if we want to use more water than we're presently using? What happens with our plan?
So actually, and this is going to be the biggest component of our discussion tomorrow and Wednesday. So we need to set this sustainable criteria. And I see the point of lowering, for example, the groundwater levels. Let's start from that. We need to be able in the plan to demonstrate that whatever we set as our threshold for groundwater levels is not having an impact on other beneficial uses and users. So the typical example is that there is a river that comes through the basin, and there are groundwater dependent ecosystems that need to be preserved. So what we need to demonstrate is that wherever we set these levels, and we can go lower than the 2015 if we have a good justification for that, but we need to be able to demonstrate that we can go lower, but we are not impacting anybody else or anything else. So this is the key. This is the real problem. If you don't have a river and you just decide to keep going down, probably, yeah, might be that there are groundwater dependent ecosystem and that needs to be preserved. So we need to find, Amir and I are kind of debating a lot on these days on what our suggestion on how to proceed can be. And it might be that we understand the need because of also of the drought this year of using a bit more capacity in the aquifer, as long as we show that we eventually can come back. So I think even what we will be suggesting tomorrow, we are suggesting that we can most likely, at least far away, not far away, but not really next to the river, we can go lower than 2015, but we need to have a plan in place that shows that we are, I don't know, replenishing in some way, at least during the wet years or when water is available. I can see that years like this one, there is not even water available. So it's just the surface water is not there, right? So it's tricky. But the other thing that we have to do is it's these bodies, the GSA board, that needs to approve what is defined as an undesirable result. So what it's really what you don't want to see happening. And there are ways to basically build up enough room for using the aquifer over a certain amount of years at kind of the maximum possible, and then have plans for coming back through different actions. And different action in other basins, they're looking at conjunctive use, maybe using more surface water where available and less groundwater during some time of the year. We can be creative on how we can do that. But one idea is that let's say that we set minimum threshold for groundwater levels lower than where they were in 2015. And then what we can say, but still in a way that makes sense and don't have an impact on interconnected surface water. So let's say that we find a good balance on that number. And what we can say that the undesirable result is, it's something like we can look at the total number of wells and say we will have an undesirable result if, for example, 25% of the wells in the basin are going below that point, maybe for 2 years in a row. And if we think about that, this is building up enough room for a 5 years drought, because if we use 2015 and we go lower, 2015 was at the end of a 3 years drought. We go even lower and we allow for going below those values for 2 years. So it's at least a 5 years drought. And this may give us enough time to start thinking and putting in place projects that can help creating the buffer that it's needed for pumping when it's necessary. Mm-hmm. So the 2015 DAG is, you can go lower than 2015. You just have to demonstrate that you are not doing anything bad to anybody else. That's pretty much. So we need to do our due diligence in demonstrating that the model and the data and the future climate, because the other thing that we ran with the model is the future climate, and it looks like we need to account for that. So because that's happening, and you see that already.
So since we have a hydrologic model, it should be theoretically possible for us to make some scenarios where we drop the aquifer and then follow it with some fairly wet years, which we still are likely to get, and see what it would take to replenish the aquifer to like pre-drought levels. I'm assuming that's something that Amir, you can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is, I mean, Amir already ran some of these scenarios. I think already looking at the future climate, it's giving an idea of how much far down we are talking about. And we were also running scenarios where eventually, let's say that we double the pumping and see what happens. You know, that's the beauty of having a model. We can run all these assumptions. Mm-hmm. And the main problem, Glenn, is really that a lot of the wells are so next to the river. So you can imagine that you go down and the gradient is pulling more water down. So that's something, so we need to find a good balance between going down and the depletion in the surface water.
But the city also has some very deep wells which aren't in the same strata, is that correct? So they're in a lower aquifer that probably acts differently and isn't necessarily connected directly to the river.
Yeah, we need to find that. Probably we need to put together some kind of good language and good plan to demonstrate that is what's happening. Mm-hmm. So we may need more detailed data. We can build this into the 5 years update and say we will use this 5 years to fully demonstrate that there is this specific area, this specific well where we think we can keep pumping. I'm just saying that it cannot be all the wells because some wells are fully connected. So we will have to be kind of surgical on how we exercise the aquifer, mm-hmm. or the two aquifers. So there is room for using the aquifer more. I'm not saying no, we just need to be careful because you know, Glenn, how it works. And if we go too low right away without a clear plan on how to replenish if needed, might be too late. So we need to kind of move with some kind of plan in mind.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments from board members? Doug?
Well, follow on. There's probably more than one, it's probably more than two aquifers or there are probably, due to the meanders that occurred from the various streams, and of course the major flows that put the gravel here from the area of Clear Lake that used to drain through here, that built this rather massive gravel bed that's below us, and then the older gravel bed below that. It's probably not a monolith. So there are probably some areas that could be drawn down and have not as much effect, if not little effect, on some of the people drawing down near the river. The instrumentation, the monitoring is how we will learn what those differences are. But the key thing that I want to stress is everything we can do within reason to preserve for this greater community the ability to follow the water down in hard times is something I think should be very high on our mind, very high on our list of things to achieve. Thank you.
I agree with you on that, because sustainability is what we're after here, and we certainly know, based on our history of looking at hydrographs on the river, that we have up and down on our rainfall and flows. So we would expect the same to be going on with the aquifer below, although it does seem to be very resilient. So that's what we have to take advantage of, is kind of trying to, like you said, maximize the ability to take water out of the ground during a year like the one coming up, with the idea that it's going to be replenished, so we're not doing damage. So I think that's something that's very, very important as an outcome in our studies. Other comments or questions?
Yeah, this is Al. I would like a fact check from those of you that attended that meeting yesterday, because I heard at the Upper Russian River Water Association meeting last night a couple of comments that seemed extreme that supposedly came from that meeting. So I want to hear if these are factual. Is it a fact that the diversion from the Old River will cease in the middle, April 15th, and there will be no more water coming through the Potter Valley project? And is it factual that by July there will only be water for health and safety available in the river?
No and no.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because that disturbed a lot of people yesterday.
Yeah, as it should. and that's one of the things that I really asked of the group, is let's not start rumors, and until we have a plan, let's not really talk about what extreme events might happen to us. Certainly there are things that could be very, very bad, but neither one of those were things that I heard discussed. And I was at the meeting. Beth, did you hear that? I certainly didn't.
No, I can see where those things might have been extrapolated on a sort of accidental level. But no, the Potter Valley project inflows are uncertain at this point. We're waiting for PG&E and FERC to, PG&E is going to be looking at filing a variance to FERC on their flow regime, which will have a direct impact on Lake Mendocino, whatever they decide to continue diverting through the Potter Valley project. That is an unknown, it's an uncertainty at this point. So a lot of the projections that were provided yesterday, I believe that they were assuming the low end of the Potter Valley project inflow. And Glenn, Devin, correct me if you had a different impression. And what was your second point?
That by July, it would only be health and safety, the only water available. All other uses would be.
Yeah, so there was a projection that was developed by Sonoma Water Agency engineers that, with current storage levels, considering low intake, inflow from Potter Valley project under normal demand, how the drawdown would happen. And so that was a hypothetical. And I see Nicole, you're trying to interrupt.
Yeah, want to kind of put a reminder out there that this is director's reports, and we're getting a little far out of the spirit of reports and getting into kind of full-blown discussions and question answer sessions which aren't really on the agenda. So just, I think it's okay to, you know, report about meetings we've all been attending, but let's try to keep it to that and not stray too far out of the spirit of reports.
So Chair McGordy, you want to direct me on?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
Nicole?
Oh, just trying to make sure we're not covering a topic very thoroughly to the point that we're now discussing topics that aren't on the agenda, since this is a report item, not, you know, agendized as a discussion on a specific topic.
Okay, that's fine, but I think this is germane. We are, you know, because we're directors that sit on other boards and commissions, I feel like this is important information. But to Nicole's desire to keep us focused, that legally, I think that's also an issue. So, Doug?
Let's put on the agenda for the next meeting a more open discussion.
I think that's a really good idea, because we'll have more information by then. This is still kind of, you know, fast developing, and we don't know everything yet on how what's going to happen, what are the scenarios for water releases. So we could certainly put that on the agenda in the future. So with that, I think we can conclude our director's reports, and someone else has something germane to our meeting today. Okay, with that, Nicole, are there any public comments?
Mayor of Ukiah, who's the alternate for my seat, has his hand up.
Oh, sure, Juan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Gordy. I just wanted to make raise a point on the fact that I think we need to have more information out to the Spanish-speaking community, to the Latino community, to raise awareness in terms of water conservation. You know, thanks, Beth, for information that you have been sharing. I have been publishing that information, and I think we need to have more. I know these conversations, we have them in English, and there's very little in Spanish or you know, geared towards the Latino community. So I'm just thinking that we need to focus on that also, as that community keeps growing, and you know, every drop of water counts, and everybody's using water. So a lot of people may not be aware. You know, not everyone has gone out to the lake and seen you know, the levels. It just, you know, I think we need to make more noise in the Latino community in terms of water conservation.
Well, thank you for that point. And Beth, I think this is something we should take up with with Joe Scriven at the RCD to make sure that we have Spanish materials available too for sharing through Spanish media.
Thank you. Yes, we are working on that. We would offer, you know, we would accept any help that anyone had to offer. One, maybe we can connect on different folks and organizations to connect with. I do know that in conjunction with Sonoma Water Agency and the Russian River Watershed Association, there will be some radio spots going out soon, and those will be in Spanish as well as English. So it's all hands on deck. If you have a suggestion, please contact me at the Russian River Flood Control District, and we'd love to get your input, feedback, and support.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, everybody, and thank you for a good meeting. And when is our next meeting scheduled at this point?
The next meeting will be the second Thursday in May, which will be May 13th.
The 13th. Okay. All right, I'll be working with Andrew for the agenda, and we'll be sure to include a more involved and rigorous discussion on our water supply. By then, we'll know quite a bit more. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.